Hello and welcome to the second part of our unit on work and generosity, where we're going to be applying the teachings from Garden City regarding work, where as an act of service, as an act of worship, we draw forth the raw materials of the earth to make something beautiful. One of the ways that we utilize the raw materials or serve or worship or ascribe meaning to something is through our money, through the way that we spend our money. And one of the things, when I started studying theology, I kind of bought into this myth that if you want to learn a lot about money and how it works, that equals greed. And I kind of inversely bought into the opposite myth that if you don't want money to have power over you, think about it as little as possible, or don't learn that much about it. And this is a really common thing and really unhelpful. That honestly, if you want to give well, if you are in business, if you want to pay your workers well, if you want to bring forth a quality product, if you want to serve both your family, your customers, and your employees, you absolutely need to know how money works. And so this lecture today will be focused on some personal finance. And one of the reasons I started teaching this, when I first got hired at Salle, I was told that there was this part of Christian lifestyles, and I had never studied personal finance, and so honestly I didn't teach it for the first 3 years I worked here. Instead, I did a lot of personal study and learned all of this, and I can say very confidently that if I had known this and put it into practice as soon as I graduated from college, I would have between $20,000 and $30,000 more dollars than I have now. And so a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about in here are pretty easy to understand conceptually, but if you don't practice them, it's not really worth anything. And so I highly encourage you to remember this as you go forward in your life. So when we think about a Christian approach to money and finance, one of the things that's really at the center, and we talked about this a little bit with simplicity, is this stewardship mindset, that everything that we have is given to us to take care of for a while, that everything that we have comes from God, everything that we have is going back to God, and that everything that we have now can be enjoyed with God. And when we studied Ecclesiastes, we also study that that everything is hevel, it's smoke, it's vapor. You have something, you're not going to be able to have it forever, and that could be because it breaks down. It could be because you lose it. It also could be because you die and you can't enjoy these things forever. That material possessions are necessarily fleeting, and so we don't see them as things that we own. We see things that we take care of for a while, and often, in service towards others and service to things that really matter. And this is really the heart behind what we're doing here, that the goal to understand how to use money well is to serve the relationships that we are in. Another thing that's really important is a practice mindset, that many people might be surprised, but people really do give up on budgeting money. People don't like to think about things that stress them out, and so they'll often avoid them. And when people shift from not thinking about money well to thinking about money well, they will tend to make some mistakes. And it's really important not to have this element of perfectionism, because it takes some time to really get these habits working. But once you have them, you'll be fine. But if you are a perfectionist and at the beginning it's not all working perfectly and you give up, that's not a good thing. Another thing you're going to want to have, and this kind of goes right in line, is that we're really talking a lot about habits here, more than the ability to do math. And so it's really important to have an investment mindset that as time goes on, the things that we have increase and decrease in value. And similarly with our actions, that habits like going to the gym or having a cup of coffee in the morning, these are investments in future actions. If we do one over and over again, the easier it will be to do them in the future. And it's kind of similar with money, that if our habits regarding money are good, we will have more money. And this is something to pay attention to as we go forward. And the last thing is really important. So it's important to recognize your season of life. We often, when we think about financial value, especially when we think about generosity, as you saw when we studied Hebrew agriculture, there was the tithe of 10%. And if you've grown up around Christianity, you probably have heard this as what Christians should give. And I'll make some arguments about how this might not work well depending on your season of life. That arguably, when you're younger and you're starting out, that giving this percentage is not necessarily what's valuable. Perhaps you should focus more on your time. But then at the same time, as you become more secure, that you probably could go significantly above this 10% as part of a lifestyle of radical generosity. Okay, so let's get into the big ideas that you should take away from this. One of the first ones is this myth that that income determines wealth. In fact, when we think about going to college, when we think about jobs, most people, when they think about, okay, if I want to have money as I get older, I need to focus on jobs that have really high incomes. And that makes sense in a big way because, well, if you have a lot of money coming in, the odds are you will have a lot of money. And in many ways, that does make sense. Now, the problem is that often people spend in accordance with or even above their lifestyle. So even if you're making $200,000 a year, if you're spending $210,000 a year, you are becoming less wealthy every year, even though you're making a lot of money. And someone who's making $35,000 a year and spending $30,000 a year will be making money, building wealth. And this is really the thing to pay attention to, is that a positive cash flow is the main thing to look at when we determine wealth. That there's a reason why people who are wealthy can lose everything. And there's a reason why people who often don't make very much can, even though they might not look like from the outside, they could actually have quite a bit of wealth. And this is also something to focus on regardless of what kind of line of work you're going into and what income that has. If you learn the skills of a positive cash flow, you'll generally be doing much better than someone who doesn't, that has a high income. The second myth, and I already addressed this a little bit, is that if you're good at math, you're going to be good at budgeting. And this is a myth that I bought into as a high school student and a college student. In high school, I found math to be my easiest course. I always did very well in math. So I looked at the basic math that we do regarding personal finance, and I was like, it's basically pretty much addition, subtraction, a little bit of multiplication, and a little bit of percentages, and that's it. And I will be honest, that is really all that it is. And so I was like, okay, I can do calculus, I can do all of these things. Who cares? It's going to be super easy. But the problem is that budgeting in real time is much more about your habits, what you're doing day in and day out, and your psychology than it is about math. That the way we act when we think about money or when we think about wanting something, these are the habits and the mindsets that matter much more than can I add and subtract well. So let's throw it all together. How would it make sense that habits make more sense? Habits and mindset make more of an effect than being able to add and subtract. So let's just do a quick example. So you have $2,500 a month, you pay $600 in rent, $600 in food and drink, $70 for your phone bill, $100 in insurance, and $400 on your car loan and your student loan. We can even say that's $100 and $300. $100 a month on gas, $130 on just other stuff. And so you spend $2,000. And so this is not necessarily earning a lot of money, but not necessarily earning a really small amount of money. And you have $500 extra. What can you buy with $500? And so when we think about this, we often will just see like, okay, there's a dollar number. But when we think about it in real time, what we're constantly making compromises with is, okay, is $500 to Xboxes? Is $500, 20 times going out to eat over the course of the month? Is it going out with friends when they ask you to go hang out? Is it going all in on an Airbnb at the beach for the weekend and going out to eat while you're there? Is it, preparing for a vacation in the future? One of the points is that we're constantly, when we see just the money signs, it's really easy to do the math and be like, oh, you should pay this to get your loan off earlier. But in the real time, we're constantly having to have the habits to actually do this rather than paying for what we want and what we can see right now. Because truth is, people have very little attachment to numbers going up and down slightly and have great attachment to actual things. And so this is important to recognize as we go forward. And another thing to show how psychology is really important as we look at budgeting is when we look at how debt works. And so people will, when we study percentages, you say like, okay, so if I have a $4,300 loan and what's 15% of 4,300, and you Office fans might know the answer, it's $645. And so we often might think that, okay, so if I took out this loan, I'll need to pay $645 over the course of the loan. Now, obviously, I chose this more for comedic value, but 15% interest is incredibly high. And since you're paying just a small portion every month, and that loan is accumulating interest during that time, you actually pay way more than the original. You end up paying about 3 times that, $1,838. And to see how that works at the beginning and at the end, at the beginning, the balance of the loan, $4,300, is really high. And the amount you're subtracting from it, $100 a month, is really low. And it accumulates interest during that time. And so if you look here, this is the amount of interest it would accumulate basically during that 1 month. It'd actually be a little bit higher because it's usually continuous interest. And so $53.75. And so when you pay that $100, if you look at your balance on this incredibly high interest loan, you would have only paid $46.25 off of your loan. And so basically what at the very beginning, the interest rate feels more like 200% rather than 15%. And so when we learn percentages, we'll usually do this math. We often don't think about this math, and we don't think about the real life experience that comes with it acting more like this, especially at the beginning. And this is where you can be like, why am I even playing these things? Like, what's the point? And then feeling a little bit depressed about like the loans that we have and the debt that we have, we will be more likely to spend money on immediate satisfaction and actually cause this problem to get worse. And so this is something really to pay attention to as we go forward, because the negative psychology of starting to pay off debt and how little the balance goes down can be really draining to people. So it's in light of those two main things that wealth is built off of a positive cash flow, and that budgeting is more about psychology and habits than it is about being able to do math. And I'm taking this from Dave Ramsey, not Gordon Ramsay, his 7 baby steps for financial peace. Even though, if you just look at the photo, he looks like one of these classic get rich quick guys, that the way to make $1 million is to sell 100,000 books or programs for $10 kind of guy. I will say that if you read his book, I read The Total Money Makeover, and you put it into practice, he says that what he's promising generally takes about 7 years to complete, depending on where you're at. And from talking with many people and actually being in this process myself, I'm close to the end of year 4, and it actually is going exactly as he says it would. And so I just want to say that right at the beginning. And so his main point, and if you know this, you'll kind of get the gist of it, that his goal is for people to be debt-free and to avoid Murphy's Law. And Murphy's Law is that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And he kind of applies the opposite of it, that if you have a more secure life and not many things can go wrong, fewer things will tend to go wrong. And so, one of the reasons he talks so much about being debt-free is that debt causes a stress on the mind. I think about when I was in high school and college, if I owed a friend 20 or 40 or 50 bucks and I didn't have it right then, every time I'd see that friend, I would immediately think like, I don't have the money. And that'd be a small point of stress. And sometimes I would even be like, if I had a friend who was like always going to remind me about it, I would kind of avoid seeing that person, and thered be a little bit of stress there. Now imagine if you owe that person $100 or $1,000 or $10,000. This causes stress. And one of Dave Ramsey's basic points, and it doesn't take a psychological genius to understand this, that if you are stressed, you tend to make worse decisions in the moment. And this is one of the classics of discernment, that if you're in a period of high stress and low stability, this is not a good time to make a big life change. It's not a time to make a big decision, because people don't make very good decisions while they're stressed. And so this gives us a little bit of insight into generational poverty, because if people have a lot of debt or have a lot of money problems, they don't have the clarity of mind to make good decisions about their money problems, and they're more likely to make worse decisions that will lead them into greater poverty. Obviously, that's not everything to deal with generational poverty, but that is a small part of it. And so, because of that, and because of the freedom of mind that you have if you're debt-free, he sees that as the main thing. And so, he has 7 steps. We're going to mainly focus on the first 3, mainly because that's where you're probably going to be for the foreseeable future after college. Mainly, that would be the first 6 years after college. And I'll be honest, he does address most of his things to people who are already in trouble, although it does work if you're doing well right from the beginning. And so his first step is to minimize expenses with a tough budget and make an emergency fund. Then his second step, and you can guess it, is to pay off all your debts except for your house, your mortgage, if you own one, using the snowball method, the debt snowball principle, and then to build 3 to 6 months of expenses in savings. And if you don't have a house, this would be also a good time to buy property. And then you go into steps 4 through 7, and you can pause it and read it here. Oh, I do want to speak briefly that the goal of this is to get to the point where you have paid off your home, you have retirement, you save for your kids' college, and you build wealth and give. And when we look at the scriptures, when we look at the gospel, Jesus doesn't say we're supposed to give 10%. Jesus usually calls for radical generosity. And I just want to introduce this idea to you of a reverse tithe. So giving 90% of your income rather than 10. And for people that really want to have financial success, this is actually a sustainable model. That this could be something that you could shoot for. And this is something really interesting and I think really awesome. And this is sort of the model that I'm working to build my life upon. I don't know if I'll ever get to that point, but I just want to put that in there as a possible goal, because the goal of this is to kind of make yourself secure and stable so that you can support others. Obviously, first coming with your own family and then moving out to the greater community. So I'm going to go through the first step and then I'm going to end the video. So the first step is obviously that is based on cash flow. That if you're already in the negative, there's nothing you're really doing to build wealth and reverse the curve. And so you need to create a tough budget. Now, often the first month would be counting your expenses. And once you have a good count of everything you buy in a month, then you create a tough budget. And with that tough budget, you must have a positive cash flow. And basically, if you have things that you're paying on that you can't sustain, you would need to get rid of them. This would be a good time to sell some things. If you have a lot of things that are costing you money, or you bought and you don't use but you could sell, this would be a time to do that. And yeah, in that second month, you create that budget, and then you use your first excess money to build an emergency fund. And he recommends $500 for single people and $1,000 for a couple. And the reason for this is Murphy's Law, that people who are starting out budgeting, it's very stressful. They don't like it because they have to reshape their habits. And you can start doing it. And if you make your budget perfectly balanced, so you end up with zero and you have no emergency fund, something bad might happen and it could derail you. When I started, it was a few years ago during that big snowstorm, and I was driving in the snow and the ice, and I was driving perfectly well until that final turn, and then my car slipped and crashed into the pavement, and I had to get my car realigned, and then they also told me that my tires were really old, and I needed to replace my tires. So there was several $100s, and I had just started this process. And it reminded me that, that if you don't prepare for things that you couldn't necessarily have planned for, it can be easy to get derailed and go back to, I can't do budgeting, and I'll just try my best to pay less than spend less than I'm earning. And so this is where it comes from. And this generally take 1 to 2 months to minimize your expenses with the tough budget and to create that emergency fund. And then once you deplete it, if something really bad does happen and you need to use it, you should take the beginning of the next month to replenish it, to always have $500, $1,000 just in case. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and that will be the end. So one of the things that is really special about Dave Ramsey's model, it doesn't really work well during the time of the coronavirus and quarantine, because cash has a lot of potential for germs, much less than credit and debit cards. But this model will come back to being valuable after this is all over. I've definitely moved back to credit cards, but I used to use this model a lot. And the main thing he recommends to help you budget and spend less is use cash. And the reason is that cash is inconvenient. If you have to go to the bank and get money from the ATM, it's less convenient. And then you have to count it all out. And one of the reasons this is good is that if something is easy to do, people will tend to do it, even if it's not the best thing. So just swiping your credit card or your debit card is much easier than going through all the process of getting money out from the bank and making sure you have enough money in your wallet to do the thing you want to do and all of that. And so obviously if you make it harder to do, you're just going to spend less money because it's more difficult to spend money. And It's also something that, if you go to the grocery store and you have $100 in your pocket and you left your credit cards and your debit cards at home, you then, like let's say the bill comes out to $107. Normally, if you were using your debit card or your credit card, you would just be like, okay, that's pretty much the same, and you wouldn't do anything. But if you only have $100 there, you would need to send something back. You'll have to self-budget. You'll have to not make compromises, and you'll really allow yourself these opportunities to think whether something is really the best thing for you to buy. And then also, it's more kinetic and visual that when I open up my wallet and I see the amount of money and I think about what I want to buy, I'll automatically think about whether I have enough money for this. And you're going to spend less money because you're seeing your money, and you're seeing, when you take out the money and you give it to someone, there's that kinetic and visual element that honestly, numbers subtracting from other numbers in an account that you can look at, that doesn't have that effect. And so this is something really important, that when we see money, this is a lot more of an impact than seeing money on a screen. And this is something really important. And I find that when I just switch to cash, and in any month where I've used cash, I will spend about 33% less. I spend about a third less than I do normally, just with all of the added opportunity for decision making and the increased difficulty of spending money. I will go on to this last part just because it really adds on well, that if you want to step up your cash game even one more level higher, and I found that this allowed me to save about 10% more than just doing cash, that you take out in cash the amount of money you have for a given period. So whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, or 1 month, and you divide your expenses into categories and make an envelope for each category. So you've got gas, food, going out, etc., healthcare, if you have co-pays or something like that. And what you do is you have your budget, and you put the amount of money for that pay period into the envelopes. And during that pay period, if you need gas, if you know you're about to go buy gas, you go look in the envelope and you'll see how much money you have left. And the thing that this does is that in every category then, you have more accountability, and you have more of that thing of, you open up the envelope and you see how much money, and then you'll start to edit your future behavior based on the amount of money you have, and you'll be even better at sticking to your budget, and perhaps even saving money and having money in your envelopes at the end of the pay period. Also, if you want to do this, you can do a little craft activity where you go to Goodwill and buy an old cool book, or even just a nondescript book, and do that with the X-Acto knife. You cut out things, that way you can put these envelopes in them and hide them in your house. Super cool, definitely recommend. And that'll be the end of our first video about budgeting.